Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast, Joel Rosen shares the story of how sarcoidosis invaded his life.
And I woke up and I just wasn't feeling right. Nothing dramatic, just almost like a start of a cold or maybe a flu. And that started my journey. I was sick for the next 3 months before I even got a diagnosis.
And now he's helping all of us in the struggle.
You know, when I first became aware of the board and a lot of what it's doing, it does seem like there's been a lot of recent movement and gain in communications among and between people who are doing the research, sort of this whole initiative to get, institutions on board.
It's all coming up on the award-winning FSR Sarc Fighter podcast.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 97 of the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast. I'm your host, John Carlin. This episode is brought to you by aTyr Pharmaceuticals. To learn more about their new pulmonary sarcoidosis trial called FZOFIT, visit stopsarcoidosis.org/aTyr trial, and there's a link in the show notes. I'm also excited to tell you about the FSR Annual Virtual Global Summit, which is coming up soon. Impacted by sarcoidosis and looking for answers, FSR invites patients, their friends and family, and clinicians to attend the 2023 Global Virtual Summit. Find your community, find your life is this year's theme. Join FSR's biggest event of the year. It's November 3 through 5, the 3rd through the 5th, 2023, to hear from leading experts. You can connect with others and get your sarcoidosis questions answered. Learn more and register now by visiting the FSR website, www.stopsarcoidosis.org/summit-2023, and there's a link in the show notes, as always. I can tell you that at the summit this year, I will be moderating one of the events, and there's been some preliminary discussion that I may be moderating another event. So we're working on some schedules and kind of looking at things right now, but if it works out, I will see you at least once and perhaps twice. Few episodes ago, I told you about how I sort of tested my resolve and my abilities to do difficult things when I covered the Virginia National Guard. I was embedded with them during their month at the U.S. border with Mexico, where they are helping to enforce the U.S. or Texas policy, I should say, trying to prevent migrants from crossing randomly into the United States. And this was at Eagle Pass, Texas. And it was in July, and temperatures were ranging up. I think the hottest it got when we were there was 105, but it had been 107 the day before we got there. And it was the kind of heat that I was just not used to. But there's dust, there was stress, there was all kinds of different things. But I told you in an earlier podcast that I was actually fine in terms of sort of what I would have called pushing my limits post-sarcoidosis. This would have been the kind of thing that before I had sarcoidosis, I would have thought that I was better able to withstand those types of stressors better than a lot of people. Let's just put it that way. I wouldn't have shied away from that type of an assignment. But since I've had sarcoidosis and gone through the various medications and everything else, and the ongoing neuropathy that I have from sarcoidosis, I was not sure that I would do well with that. But as it turned out, I did well. Didn't have any particular troubles sarcoidosis related. And so now I can share with you that we have just finished producing a 1-hour documentary, myself and the team at WSLS 10. And I'm quite pleased with the way it came out. We had a lot of access to what was going on down at the border. We were there. We were flying drones. We had GoPros. Of course, we had a very sophisticated television camera. And we were given access to talk to a lot of different people about what was going on down there. And now it's all together in a documentary, and you can watch it at WSLS.com. And of course, I will put a link in the show notes as well for that. So that's what I've been working on a lot over the course of the last several podcasts in the background. In my real job, I have been working on that documentary, and I can tell you that is a ton of work. It's work that I enjoy, but there's a lot of it. Speaking of that, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I just want to ask you to help me reach more people so that FSR can be as effective as possible. And so if you share the link from the podcast on your social media, just pop it out there. Say, hey, I was listening to the Sarc Fighter podcast. Good episode this week. Here it is. And it's also important that you subscribe. And if you can, just take a moment and give it a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever your pods are cast. And it also helps if you give just a brief positive testimonial. I can tell you that I would certainly really appreciate that. So if you wouldn't mind, I would be very glad if you would do that. I've had some emails from some folks who have just learned that they have sarcoidosis. They're wondering how to deal with it, what's going on with their bodies, all the questions that we all asked in the very beginning. And so I've tried to answer their questions. And if I can't, I can just say it's nice to have the whole FSR team or the many volunteers, many of you who are listening, who step up and help guide these folks. And so that is, I just want to tell you that it seems like I've had more emails than usual lately, and I welcome them. So you can always ping me at carlinagency@gmail.com. And if I can't help you, I'll direct you to somebody who can. And I'm always willing to help somebody else who is afflicted with sarcoidosis. Speaking of which, today I have for you an interview with Joel Rosen. He is an attorney in Pennsylvania who recently was diagnosed with sarcoidosis. Joel is the managing partner at High Schwartz Attorney at Law in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, where he counsels basically business and corporate and commercial folks with their transactions. He tells them how to form mergers and acquisitions, licensing, sales, financing, so forth. And he helps a wide base of clients, including those in biotechnology franchises, the weight loss industry, food and restaurants, consumer products, media and entertainment software technology, and nonprofit organizations, which is key. Rosen right now is serving on the board of directors of several nonprofits, including the Hepatitis B Foundation, the Pennsylvania Biotechnology Center, the Baruch S. Bloomberg Institute, the Montgomery Bar Foundation, and now, yes, the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Before joining High Schwartz back in 2007, Joel owned the offices of Joel Rosen, and he also has served as the Vice President General Counsel of Nutrisystem Incorporated and the Senior Corporate Counsel of Amco Transmission. So he brings a lot of background and information and legal advice to the table. But today, no legal advice on the podcast, but we will be talking about how Joel discovered he had sarcoidosis, how he's come to terms with what's going on with his body, and we'll talk about how he came to be on the board that governs so much about the direction of where sarcoidosis research and outreach together are headed. So Joel Rosen is coming up next here on the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast, and joining me now is a fellow Sarc Fighter, Joel Rosen. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
So you are the newest member of the board of directors for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, and that happened after you, kind of like we all do, went down the road and discovered, wow, I have sarcoidosis. You want to tell us a little bit about how things just started to go wrong one day?
Sure. So it's a date I won't forget. It was July 6th, 2021. And I woke up and I just wasn't feeling right. Nothing dramatic, just almost like a start of a cold or maybe a flu. And that started my journey. I was sick for the next 3 months before I even got a diagnosis.
3 months. So when you said you were feeling sick, like you couldn't breathe, you were tired, you were nauseous, what was it?
Tired, a little bit achy. Like I said, maybe a slight fever in the evening, but then the next day it was the same thing, and the day after that it was the same thing, and then slowly but surely it was like the movie Groundhog's Day, one day after another. Fevers at night. I just lost my appetite. I couldn't eat. At one point, about 3 or 4 weeks in, and of course you start to get a little desperate when you're not getting a diagnosis and every test comes back normal. Every blood test was normal. I had x-rays, they were normal. That just you start to wonder what is going on when you're not getting any better. Nothing was working.
Right.
Taking Tylenol for the fevers, that wasn't working. So that went on for 6 weeks or so. I was losing weight at that point, maybe 4 pounds a week. I mean, it was really getting a little scary.
So was that because you weren't eating, or because that's not something I've heard other patients say on the podcast, or was that directly related to Sarc?
Directly related to, well, I mean, I wasn't eating. It was the first time ever in my life I had no appetite whatsoever. Like I said, I was getting fevers at night. So by 6 o'clock at night, I was already heading from bed. I just couldn't, I was exhausted and I had fever, low grade fever, but still it was wiping me out. And so I skipped most dinners completely, and I would eat a very small lunch. And that would fill me up. I never had experienced that, but yeah, I had no appetite at all.
So you start out, you don't feel well. You think maybe it's a low grade virus or flu or something like it. You go to your regular doctor, right? And so how long did you continue to go through all of that with the blood tests and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so give you like a quick timeline. You have to remember all this was layered on top of the fact that COVID was really ramped up at that point. So this would have been the second summer of COVID. So the first week, I didn't even go to a doctor because with COVID out there, and I didn't think anything I had was that serious. Didn't even want to take a risk of, getting COVID on top of whatever I had. But then the first thing was you go to like the Minute Clinic, because my own doctor didn't even want to see me at that point. Go to the Minute Clinic. They take x-rays. They're normal. Go get a COVID test negative for COVID. So my doctor finally sees me about 2 weeks in. I'm still sick. Same thing every day. And determines I have a fever of undetermined origin. That was the diagnosis. That was it. So all kinds of blood tests. They came back normal with one exception. Inflammation was outside the normal range. So he basically was like, well, hopefully it'll just go away. I mean, that was it. Like, go just take it easy and see if it goes away. That wasn't good for me. So I went to see an infectious disease specialist who determined I did not have an infectious disease. And in his world, temperatures of 99.5 or 100, that's not fever. In his world, fever's 103, 104. So determined I didn't have an infectious disease, but in the meantime, he had me tested for things like lupus and Lyme disease. I mean, everything you can imagine, still no diagnosis. So I'm now at this point, it's 4 or 5 weeks in. I'm like I said, I was losing weight. I asked my primary if, could it be something gastroenterological, right? So he sent me for a CAT scan of my stomach and abdomen, and that was normal, except the lower part of my one lung showed 2 nodules. And that's really the path that started me on finding out that I had sarcoidosis. Now I'm about 6 weeks in at this point. I go for the CAT scan of the lungs and the chest. And of course, that came back, with swollen lymph nodes and a lot of nodules. And of course, my primary jumped to the conclusion it was lymphoma.
Lymphoma, right? Yeah.
Right. And so that was scary. And that's all I heard. After lymphoma, I don't think I heard anything else. But I got the actual report from the radiologist, and the radiologist was on the ball, and he wrote down not just potentially cancer, but sarcoidosis. That's the first time I ever heard of it. And so I start Googling sarcoidosis and lymphoma, and I don't recommend this for everybody, but I'm comparing the list, right? And the one thing, and then they both have similarities: night sweats, fever, lose weight, that kind of thing. But the one thing that sarcoidosis had was rashes on the legs, which I have and still have, And I'm thinking, what are the odds? Like how could that, there's no way that's lymphoma related. So I went back to my primary and we talked about sarcoidosis. He gave me the old test for sarcoidosis, which I tested out of the normal range, but he concluded incorrectly that if I had sarcoidosis, it would be way out of the normal range. So I have a son that has hepatitis B. And so for the last 20 years, I've been involved in the Hepatitis B Foundation. I'm sit on their board, 2 related nonprofit boards. And so I got used to reading, he was an infant when we found out that he had it. And I got used to reading the reports myself. So I went to the Cleveland Clinic website and looked up sarcoidosis. They have a great website. And that's where I found that their website talks about the old test and how if you're a new patient or you have a mild version, your test might just be slightly out of normal range, which is where I was. So I then went and found a couple of different pulmonologists, found one I liked who had a background in sarcoidosis. But now all this takes time, right? So now we're about 10 or 11 weeks into my being sick. And I'm finally getting around to maybe getting an accurate diagnosis. And ultimately, I had a bronchoscopy, which confirmed that it was sarcoidosis.
Yeah. So once they get a piece of that granuloma, then they know for sure that that's what it is.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and so actually, compared to some of the people I've talked to, a 3-month journey, believe it or not, is relatively short.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think I was lucky because I could have been headed down the path of lymphoma, completely wrong diagnosis, but for the radiologist who really was on the ball. I was just lucky that I got a radiologist who knew what sarcoidosis was.
Right. But then going back to that original picture, it was like the CAT scan was of your abdomen, and on the corner of the picture, there's your lung. And in that little corner, they say, that's a nodule in your lung.
Correct.
So that's kind of good that somebody had the, foresight or ability to recognize that something over here on the side of this image didn't look right.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. And so they decided that I better get a full picture of the lungs and chest.
Right. I want to ask you about the rash on your legs. Was it down around your ankles, or where was it?
Yeah, it's by it's around the shins, like the lower shins, right? And
right.
I know, it's funny, but I think that started before I quote unquote felt sick. You know what I mean? That was maybe the first inclination, and it's horrible. I mean, it's not that it looks horrible, but it's so itchy you want to tear your skin off. And so looking back at the whole process, I think that probably appeared a few weeks before I started feeling bad, and was probably the first wave of sarcoidosis.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I had the night sweats and I had the rash around my ankles and had no idea what it was, but I wasn't otherwise feeling bad. But I probably had those rashes around my ankles for 2 years before I was diagnosed. So,
And who would put it together, right? I mean, it's such an odd side effect that you would have a lung disease, and one of the symptoms would be rashes around your ankles, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. So, all right, so let's pick your story back up. So now they know that you have sarcoidosis. So did they go through the normal path, starting with prednisone?
No, I was lucky. I found a pulmonologist who had studied at Johns Hopkins and had worked in their sarcoidosis clinic for years before he had come up to Pennsylvania. And his approach was he put me on an inhaler immediately. I mean, even before when I first went to him for my first appointment, even before I had the bronchoscopy, I think he was leaning towards sarcoidosis because he gave me all kinds of, lung tests, breathing tests, and he knew I had some kind of, I was down to around 60% capacity. So right away he's put me on a corticosteroid inhaler and a backup inhaler in case I had problems. And his approach was basically, if it's not getting worse, do the inhaler. I changed my diet. I started to eat much healthier than I was eating. And Motrin, believe it or not, Tylenol didn't have any effect at all, but Motrin was making me feel a little better. So I never went on oral steroids. Now it took he said, he didn't want me to be stuck on the steroids. So between the inhaler and diet, and it finally, it took about a year. I mean, it's a long time, but I guess I avoided the steroids. But it took about a year, and I was feeling pretty much back to normal. But it was a slow burn, to get better. I was on like 3 Motrin a day would keep the fever away initially, and then I went down to 2 Motrin. I took them when I started to feel bad, so then I was down to 2 Motrin a day. Then I was down to 1 Motrin a day, and so finally, about a year after I was first sick. Now, I say first sick, felt sick and had symptoms. I started to feel normal again. So if I got sick in the summer of 2021, by the summer of 2022, I felt like I was okay, even though I knew I still have the rash on the legs and I still get fatigue, but I wasn't wasn't the same kind of fatigue. I mean, when I was first sick, by 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I was done. That was it. I was in bed. I was in bed at 6.
Wow. And do you attribute the fatigue to reduced lung capacity or to something deeper in your system that is just sarcoidosis that just makes you tired?
Yeah, I think it's more just part of sarcoidosis and not lung capacity, because my lung capacity got better with the steroid inhaler, and the fatigue continued for quite a while. And unless you had this kind of fatigue, it's not tired. I mean, you probably maybe suffer from it too. There's a big difference between being tired and fatigue, where, I remember trying to help somebody pack boxes to move, and I went to their place and I was there maybe a little over an hour, and I was just too tired to continue. And they were they knew I wasn't feeling well, and they were nice about it. When I got home, I laid down and I fell asleep for like 2.5 hours in the middle of the day, which I never would do. But I mean, some things just were so exhausting back then. I'm doing better now, but there's still times where if I push myself, it's not being tired. It's just being like, okay, that's it. I'm done for the day. It almost like washes over you. You feel it in your head, you feel it in your body. It's just it's different than being tired. And it's not just lung. I don't think it's related to the lung capacity necessarily.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, I've heard that, and I appreciate you describing the difference, because fatigue is something that you come to associate with sarcoidosis, and people listening probably are either feeling guilty because they can't push through it, or they're not understanding what's going on. And so for you to come on and talk about that, I think is extremely helpful to people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll give you one. So when I found the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, my years of work with Hepatitis B Foundation, they have a great patient hotline that assist patients. So when I was sick and I knew this was a rare disease, and my primary didn't know anything about it, obviously, and I was trying to get up to speed. So I I found the foundation online, and I knew they had this patient where they set you up with someone else who who had been ill also, as a mentor in a way. And I was lucky enough to get a gentleman named Jim Kuhn, who I think you know and have interviewed. And what a great guy.
Yeah.
And he was, he was very helpful in sort of helping me. But one of the things Jim taught me was, you think about sarcoidosis, the fatigue is it's almost like you have your energy is like a drawer full of spoons. And every time you do something, you take one spoon away, and you only have so many spoons that day. So when you've used up the spoons, that's it. You're done. And that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's kind of right. Once the fatigue comes, that's it. You got to just call it a day. It takes time to recharge.
Yeah. Jim is a wonderful guy, wonderful advocate, and does so many things for the foundation, and he's just fantastic. So you found FSR by a Google search?
Yes.
Okay. And then you started using the resources there, and you were assigned probably an advocate,
Right.
and that turned out to be Jim. And
Yeah.
you probably had some either phone or Zoom calls with Jim. And so you very quickly became aware of FSR, but FSR became aware of you. So you've been doing board work for hepatitis. And how did it come to pass that now you're on the FSR board? What was that path like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate the fact that, look, I understand that when you're looking for a cure for disease, candidly, it all comes down to finances, right? I mean, you need money to do research, and it's just expensive. I mean, finding, 20 years of experience with looking for a cure for hepatitis, it's just a lot. It just takes a lot of money to fund these research projects. So, I was very grateful to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, for FSR, for the help that I got. And I made a donation, candidly, I made a nice donation to the foundation. And they became aware of my background and my years of experience on nonprofit boards. And at the time, they mentioned being on the board, but I actually I didn't want to say turned it down. I said I wasn't really ready or capable. I still was not 100% when I first started dealing with people at FSR. I think I might have been Angela. I think she's O'Malley now. I think it was Friedlander at the time, who reached out to me. Yeah, and very early on, I talked to Mary McGowan and Tricia. But I was still pretty fatigued in between, work, which I still have to do, and some of my other, nonprofit work. I didn't think I had the bandwidth, frankly, or the capacity. But I got involved in helping them fundraise a little. And, as I started feeling better and felt like I had more bandwidth, and I helped raise some money for the foundation for FSR. The discussion moved to what I want to be on the board, and frankly, I'd love to help. I'd like to. This is obviously something very personal to me, and I'm happy to be a part of it and to try to find a cure or other treatments for the disease. I mean, there's really not much out there that's specific to sarcoidosis. They call them there's really no drug. I mean, there's no drug specifically tailored to sarcoidosis. Well, the steroids help, but they're not a cure.
Right. And yeah, there is no sarcoidosis specific drug right now. There are two that are starting to be in the later phases of production and not production, but research. And if everything continues to go well, the drug from aTyr, I think, is the closest. And that would be something that would be a steroid relieving drug. So that would be, that's great. And I think that FSR has moved the needle a lot. So you're relatively new on the board. I'd like for you to tell people a little bit about your personal life and contributions because you are the managing partner at a law firm in Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll give you just a quick background. It's weird giving someone a resume, but so I've been practicing now for 40 years and started out a small firm in Bucks County, PA, and quickly moved in-house to two different corporations. The last one was the Nutrisystem, actually, which still exists. I was there 9 years. I was vice president, general counsel at the time I left. But I got corporate America can be a little taxing and ups and downs. And so I went out on my own for another 9 years. I have my own practice, and be careful what you wish for, because I was getting so busy that I was either going to have to start adding lawyers under me there, or move into a firm. And 16 years ago, I found the current firm I'm with, High Swartz. I hope you don't mind to give it a shout out. And so, my background was business law, and at a point, maybe 4 or 5 years in, they were looking for a new managing partner. The old managing partner was going to step away, and so I got took over the position as managing partner. That's got to be about 10 or 11 years now, maybe a little more. And it's been great for me. I mean, I love the firm. It's a 23 person law firm at this point, and general practice. So we do pretty much everything, and it's just a nice atmosphere. It's county. We're in two local counties, Bucks and Montgomery, and it's a great place to be.
Cool. What do you do in your free time, if you have any?
Well, I have two kids. That usually takes up some free time.
Right.
It's funny. I used to like to travel a lot, and I'm starting to travel again, little by little. Between COVID and Sarc, for about 2 years, I was afraid to walk out the door. I have to be honest about that. And it is a little bit mentally and emotionally draining. I mean, getting sarcoidosis right in the middle of COVID was I don't think anybody was happy with COVID, but getting sarcoidosis at the same time was no bowl of cherries. So I started to travel a little bit again. I like that, and I like sports, but again, it's more watching now at this stage of my life than going or doing. But yeah, not a lot anymore. I mean, just between work and volunteer time and children, that's it. Family time and travel.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
22 and let's see, soon to be 22 and 20, soon to be 23 and 21.
Okay, so college age.
Yeah, one just graduated from American University, and I've got my daughter's a junior at the University of Delaware.
Okay, all right. So you got to keep working for a few years then.
Oh my God. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, wait till you get to grandkids like I am, and then you'll really be busy.
Right.
Right. So you said you used to play sports. I mean, were you? It seems like there's a thread among some of the people I've interviewed with sarcoidosis that they have, that they have been athletes at some level. Were you a runner, basketball player, gym guy?
Yeah, no, I mean, growing up in Philadelphia, I mean, we played basketball every day, and I played basketball, and ultimately switched into tennis. As you get older, you change. But I played a lot of basketball all the way through college and law school, and even after that for a while. I played tennis all the way into my 40s, and then slowly other things, things fade, but. Now I'm down to, especially with Sarc, I'm down to the treadmill and walking. That's really that's sports at this point.
Right.
Yeah. So
do you still do the inhaler, or are you on?
I do. Yeah, I'm on the inhaler every day. Yeah.
And that's the only therapy you're taking?
Yeah, for now. I mean, and I kind of like the approach. His approach is, if you're not getting worse, if it's not bothering you, I mean, I use a cream on the rash and the inhaler for the lungs. And, thank God, so far, that's really all I've needed. And I haven't I haven't felt the need for anything else. In other words, like, so my breathing seems to be okay. It's not getting worse. It seems to be getting better. So, um, I think I just,
Okay.
follow that approach. I'm not a big fan of drugs. It's not that I'm against drugs either, but, I see as you get older. I mean, one thing, I'm sure you've been through it. Once you get diagnosed with sarcoidosis, it's find a cardiologist, find a rheumatologist, find an ophthalmologist. I mean, you start going through the gamut of all the doctors. And I have a really good cardiologist too, but she put me on uh, cholesterol medication. She wanted to get my cholesterol way down, even though it wasn't way up, but she wanted it way down so where the good cholesterol and bad cholesterol were at the right levels, comparatively. So,
Right.
all of a sudden I'm on a blood pressure medication, a cholesterol medication, I'm taking the inhaler. It just gets to be, baby aspirin. I mean, as little extra as possible is fine with me. I just don't want to end up, taking a handful of pills every night.
Yeah, you and I are in the exact same boat with respect to that, and I expect that's also why you decided to look at your diet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, cut out red meat for the most part. It's turkey and chicken and fish. I mean, thank God my son's a big sushi fan, so we can do the sushi together. And I just try to eat a little better than I used to. That's all. You cut out some of the stuff that you really don't need. Sugar. Try to cut the sugar down.
Processed foods, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I go in fits and starts. When I first got started, I just like, all right, I'm going cold turkey. I started growing wheatgrass in my garage and making smoothies and all kinds of stuff. And so I slowly relaxed into something called the elimination diet. And I have had a nutritionist whose husband has sarcoidosis, nourished by Lindsay, and she had me on this elimination diet, which I did for a long time, and I would encourage you to at least look at that if that interests you, because I do think it made me feel better. But ultimately, like most things that are restrictive, I think we went through the holidays and there were plates of cookies everywhere, and the next thing I knew, I was eating badly again. But I do think the better I eat, the better I feel.
I
For
agree
sure.
with that. I agree with that. I was just like you. When I was sick, it was turkey, it was fresh vegetables. It was a little bit of fish, chicken. I mean, almost no meat at all. I just cut meat out pretty much completely. Cut out sugar. Fresh fruits. I was trying to do all that. So, I mean, I didn't cut out natural sugar, but processed. No cookies, no
Mhm.
chips, none of that stuff.
Right.
And it did have a big effect, I think, then. I mean, but you're right. As you feel better, you backslide, right? So now if I go out to dinner, oh, well, there's bread on the table. Who's going to pass that up, right?
Right.
Um, but so you try. One thing I've learned is even if you cheat or you feel like you're not eating well for a little bit, it doesn't hurt if once you go back, right? You can still go back and eat well, and it has positive effect.
That's right. That's right. So let's have you put your board member hat on now. You've probably attended at least a couple of meetings. What is the landscape looking like overall for Sarc patients and the foundation and the prospect for things getting better?
Yeah, so I've actually been to really one board meeting. It was
Okay.
interesting that there was a very interesting presentation by a doctor um, who's looking to fund research that I found that was very interesting, where he thinks that there's I don't know if it was a gene, but he thinks there's a way to determine which patients tend to get better. Like there's like a distinction between patients that seem to just get better from their first attack onward and patients that seem to get worse. There's a distinct split, right? And he thinks there's a way to determine who's going to follow which path, which would be helpful in the diagnosis and then future treatment. I think that would be really great to find out. Um, when I first became aware of the board and a lot of what it's doing, it does seem like there's been a lot of recent movement and gain in communications among and between people who are doing the research um, uh, sort of this whole initiative to get, institutions on board. I think that's a great initiative too. I forget what they call it already, but the major universities and hospitals that are doing research into Sarc and treating patients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's very positive. I mean, candidly, I was very impressed by how much is being done by how few people. It's kind of like the mouse that roared, right? You have a small nonprofit, but it's got its um, fingers in a lot of pies, trying to really move the needle forward. And it funds research, which is really, that's the key, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to get a cure without the research to do it, right? So yeah, I'm impressed by it, and I'm very impressed by the people who are on the board.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I'm on some small local nonprofit boards here in Roanoke, Virginia, where I live, and in some very good boards, very effective boards. But I continue to be impressed by what Mary and Tricia and everybody are doing. They really do a lot with a very small staff.
Yeah. The other thing I didn't know, but I mean, I love it. It's a great concept. I didn't realize that everybody on the board, or at least initially, that the board was set up by patients for patients to help find a cure. And I think, and I don't know everybody on the board yet. I mean, I just started meeting people, but it seems like that's still true today, that most of the board members are current or former patients.
Right. Well, Joel, look, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I hope that you continue to have good health, as good as it is now or better. And also, on behalf of the sarcoidosis community, as it's represented by the listeners of the podcast, thank you for your leadership role. We really appreciate it.
Well, great. I thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on.
All right. Thank you, Joel.
Okay. Have a great day.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
So thanks again to Joel for sharing his story, for lending his expertise, and becoming a leader in the mission to find a cure, to help FSR with all it does to help those of us with sarcoidosis. The official Sarc Fighter song is called Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards. Mark is a fellow Sarc Fighter, and you can hear his story, the story behind the lyrics to the song, in episode 12. I can tell you I release every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, my trusty dog Dougal has just left the chair in my office. He's been wanting me to play fetch with him today, and I closed the door so he wouldn't come in and disturb me because he keeps dropping the ball on my foot. So Dougal is not curled up on the chair, but he is clearly around this morning. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson, who started the foundation. Don't forget to look for me on social media under Sarc Fighter. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. I'm even on Peloton as Sarc Fighter if you have a Peloton fitness device. And my cycling blog called Carl and the Cyclist also has a section called Cycling with Sarcoidosis. If you're new here and you're just trying to figure out what Sarc is, you can listen to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. My story is episode 1. Please send me an email at carlinagency@gmail.com. It's also in the show notes. Until next time, keep fighting.
Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking,